Father Damian Ference, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We're hoping to start off with a very broad question. Who is Flannery O'Connor and why does she matter?
Flannery O'Connor was a 20th century short story writer. She also wrote 2 novels too. Born March 25th, 1925 in Savannah, Georgia. That is significant for a couple reasons. One, her birthday is on the Feast of the Incarnation, at least one of the incarnational feasts. The Feast of the Annunciation, when Jesus was conceived in Mary's womb. The other being Christmas. I mention that because O'Connor's art is incarnational. She was a devout Catholic. Her father died when she was 15 years old. That's significant. She didn't talk to many people about that. Went to college in Milledgeville, Georgia. And it was during the Second World War. Because it was during the war, she stayed in school all year round. So she finished her degree in 3 years. And then from there, she went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, very prestigious place. But interested in getting a degree in journalism, and then switched to the creative writing program and got into writing short stories. She went to an artist's camp in New York called Yaddo, and then was establishing herself with some friends, New York City, Connecticut area. But when she was 25, she got pretty sick. And it turns out that she had lupus, the same disease that killed her father. So the last 14 years of her life, she spent on a farm she called Andalusia, 4 miles outside of center of town in Milledgeville, Georgia, which is about 86 miles from Atlanta. Lived with her mother on a working dairy farm, went to mass every morning, breakfast, and then kept a very strict writing schedule every day from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., 3 hours. All she would do would be working on her fiction. In the afternoon, she'd take other meetings and write letters, but she was a highly disciplined writer. And when she coached other writers, she'd say things like, sit at your machine, just sit there and write. Don't do anything else. So she did that for 14 years, including Sundays. She turned out, depending on how you count them, writing 32 or 33 short stories, 2 novels, ton of letters. We have a few collections of those, some essays, cartoons. She was the editor of her college newspaper, and even, and most recently, a prayer journal. In terms of Catholic writers in the United States, we could say there are many good ones, but it's been said that there's only one great one, and that is Flannery O'Connor. She died August 3rd, 1964, which is significant for a few reasons. One, she anticipated in her own life a lot of the things that would come out of the Second Vatican Council, particularly the importance of lay people participating and living as salt, light, and leaven in the world. She wrote for her diocesan newspaper every 2 weeks book reviews. She'd read philosophy, she'd read literature, she'd read theology. But she felt as a daughter of the church, she owed it to the church to use her gifts to serve the church. And I think it's great that she did that. Her fiction, her art, has only increased in popularity since her death. And she even said in her lifetime, she wasn't so worried about how many books she published right away and wasn't worried about bestsellers. She was interested in art that would endure, that would last, and it certainly has. She was very committed to seeing the world as it is, in all its fullness and also in all its sorrow and sadness. She often talked about concentrating on the what is. In fact, I'm reading a book right now by a guy named John Lynch, who used to teach at Notre Dame, and it's highly philosophical, but it's on literature, and he talks about the importance of being able to find the particular in the universal. And when you write good fiction, you're always dealing with reality, themes that will deal universally with every person, but you're so good at naming the specifics, the particular, that the imagination's engaged. So she does that in a profoundly beautiful way, and also in a grotesque and violent way, which turns some people off to her work.
So I know that O'Connor can be an acquired taste for people. I know there are some people who know that she's a religious author and they expect her to be nice. They expect her to be maybe even a little bit saccharine, a little, sweet. And I don't think anybody has ever read a Flannery O'Connor short story and come away from it saying, well, that was nice. And I'm curious what you would say about why should Catholics read O'Connor given what you call the grotesque aspects of her writing?
So O'Connor was highly suspicious of a vapid, what she called a vapid, Catholicism, a hollow Catholicism, where what you are dealing with is just the shell of things. She gets down to the heart of the gospel. She gets down to the heart of belief in God or not, that God either took on flesh or he did not, that he either saved and redeemed man or he did not, that baptism either matters or it does not. So she knows that her readers mostly don't believe in God, and she wants to present reality, both as revealed by reason and by faith, in such a way to get her readers to consider what's most important and what's real. One of the ways that she thinks she can do that is actually through violence. And I'm going to try to find this section for you, 112 in Mystery and Manners. So this is a collection of her essays. And she says, I have found that violence is strangely capable of returning my characters to reality and preparing them to accept their moment of grace. So in every one of her stories, there's going to be a moment of grace where grace is offered to bring about conversion, healing, a new way of living for each character. Sometimes the grace is accepted, sometimes it's not. Sometimes we're not too sure. So she says this about her characters. Their heads are so hard that almost nothing else will work but the violence. This idea that reality is something to which we must be returned at considerable cost is one which is seldom understood by the casual reader, but is one which is implicit in the Christian view of the world. I tell the seminarians, I tell people who read O'Connor with me, two ways you know you're really understanding her work. One, you laugh when you're reading her work because it's supposed to be funny. She loved reading her own stories out loud. Two, that when you come across a character who's stubborn, struggling with pride or lust or just hard-headedness in general, and you get to the point where you say, ooh, that's me, then you're getting her work. Then it's setting you free.
So how would O'Connor describe her own Catholic faith? Was she a cradle Catholic? Was she a convert? Did she struggle a lot with her faith? How would she assess herself as a Catholic?
So she was not a revert. She was not a convert. She was raised in a very Catholic home, and she took her faith seriously. And I think a big reason for this was her father's own sickness. Her dad, she loved her dad. Her mom was good to her, and she loved her mom too, but she had fun with her dad. And her dad understood her artistic temperament in a way that her mother didn't. So when she lost her father, it was very difficult on her. And I think understanding her dad's death against the backdrop of the Paschal Mystery and the Communion of Saints increased her faith. And I also think she was so concerned with getting reality right that the church's understanding of reality went hand in hand with what she was seeing in the world, and brokenness and healing, redemption. So she was a daily mass goer. She defended her faith beautifully. There's a book, Habit of Being. It's a collection of many of her letters, about 700 pages long, but she's constantly talking about why it is that she writes the way she does. And one, because she's good. Now, why are you a writer? Because I'm good at it. And two, I write the way I do because I'm a Catholic. And I believe her.
One of the most famous stories about Flannery O'Connor has to do with a conversation about the Eucharist. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah, there is the famous story about Flannery O'Connor and the Eucharist. If you saw anything from the National Eucharistic Revival, you saw Jonathan Rumi wear a shirt that says, if it's a symbol, to hell with it. And I ran into a priest recently who said, that's really harsh because a lot of Protestants think that symbol means presence. I said, that's not what O'Connor was saying. You need to know the context. Here it is. I was once 5 or 6 years ago taken by some friends to have dinner with Mary McCarthy and her husband, Mr. Broadwater. So these are high-functioning academics in New York City. She departed the church at age 15 and is a big intellectual, capital B, capital I. We went at 8, and at 1, so 8 at night, that's when they started, and at 1 in the morning, I hadn't opened my mouth once, there being nothing for me to say in such company. The people who took me were Robert Lowell and his now wife, Elizabeth Hardwick. Having me there was like having a dog present who had been trained to say a few words, but overcome with inadequacy, had forgotten them. Well, toward the morning, the conversation turned on the Eucharist, which I, being the Catholic, was obviously supposed to defend. Mrs. Broadwater said that when she was a child and received the host, She thought of it as the Holy Ghost, he being the most portable person of the Trinity. Now, she thought of it as a symbol and implied that it was a pretty good one. I then said in a very shaky voice, well, if it's a symbol, to hell with it. And that was all the defense I was capable of, but I realize now that this is all I will ever be able to say about it outside of a story, except that it is the center of existence for me. All the rest of my life is expendable. If you see Wildcat, the new film with Maya Hawke, she stars Flannery O'Connor, they show this scene in that film, and it was designed in such a way to look like the Last Supper. And she's standing at the center and she's not saying anything, and then she says, well, if it's a symbol, to hell with it. And in fact, they put another quote in there. They use their artistic creativity to do this, saying that when people think of religion, they often think of it as a big electric blanket, when in fact it's the cross. She certainly believes in the resurrection. She certainly believes in grace, but she also knows that suffering matters and that suffering has meaning, and that when you unite your sufferings to Christ's, things that you would never imagine are able to emerge. And that's a lot of what she's trying to do. Because people don't believe that. They don't believe in what they can't see. They don't believe in grace. They don't believe in sacraments. They think this is all empty ritual. It's Joseph Campbell. Everything's the same, you know. And it's just, there's one big spirituality, and Catholicism is just a little shade of it. When what we believe is one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, right? The church Christ established, yeah.
Well, as we get toward the end here, is there a particular passage from O'Connor's writings that you would want to share as sort of a, hey, here's a taste of O'Connor that might leave the listener or the viewer wanting to read more?
Yes. So I highly recommend reading her fiction, so her stories and her novels. But what I want to read from now is what's known as a prayer journal. And she kept a prayer journal when she was working on her MFA in Iowa. But her last entry is beautiful, it's funny, it's sad, it's real, and it gives you an insight to a woman who's striving so hard to do two things at once: love God and be a great artist. My thoughts are so far away from God, he might as well not have made me. And the feeling I egg up writing here lasts approximately a half hour and seems a sham. I don't want any of this artificial, superficial feeling stimulated by the choir. Today, I have proved myself a glutton for scotch, oatmeal cookies, and erotic thought. There's nothing left to say of me. And that's the close of her journal. Now, she was a very devout woman, went to Mass every day. Why do I like that? Because we get an insight into what she was actually feeling, and that was her prayer that night. And you know what's great about it? That's what she told God. She wasn't trying to pretend everything was fine. She made a confession of what she's struggling with. And today we remember her as one of the finest Catholic authors ever to live. So I love that. I love that she didn't whitewash some of her struggles. I think it's a good lesson to all of us.
Father Damian Ference, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. This was fascinating. I hope that everybody who's watching or listening felt the same. And I hope that it'll inspire some folks to pick up O'Connor for themselves.